So now you've seen how nationalism can affect groups of people who want to be united, as in with Italy and Germany. I want to look at the effects that nationalism had on Europe's old empires. Keep in mind that in the 19th century, we still have all these very large, very old imperial systems that are kind of holdovers from the Middle Ages. The most significant empires at the time were the the Austrian Empire, or Habsburg Empire as it was sometimes called, since that's who ruled it, the Russian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. Looking at these maps, you can see all the different ethnic, religious, and linguistic groups. And the key thing here is that these empires are really, really diverse. Now, that's not unusual. By definition, an empire is one group of people ruling over others. But the key here is as nationalism starts to sweep through Europe, it comes to these countries too. So in some of these places where you've got lots of different ethnic groups, if they gain a strong nationalistic identity, the main thing they're going to want is their own nation state. A state, instead of being part of a German-led Austrian Empire, the Hungarians might say, we want our own Hungarian state. The Greeks might say, we want our own Greek nation, or nation state. And so you'll start to see the effects of nationalism on these empires. So, for example, in Austria, you have a lot of different people, but the largest minority group here is the Hungarians. Hungary had long kind of wanted independence to some extent from Austria. In 1848, they joined the other revolutions that were happening across Europe and rebelled against Austria. Now, this Hungarian revolt was put down, but it led to some lasting impact. Austria saw that it really couldn't hang on to Hungary without granting them some independence. The solution was this sort of weird two-state solution where the Austrian Empire became what was called Austria-Hungary. Essentially, you'd now have two thrones, the throne of the Austrian Empire and the throne of the King of Hungary. The Emperor of Austria would become King of Hungary, but they would have separate governments. So Hungary would have its own constitution, its own parliament, its own body of law. So it was a big compromise for Austria to have to do this, and ultimately you still really have a divided state. Another example here is the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was very diverse, but it was also really this kind of ancient, arguably dissolving empire. The perception in 19th century Europe that the Ottoman Empire was the old man of Europe. It was this potentially collapsing thing, which some historians disagree with that description. But the key was the Ottoman Empire had to reform. There was a period of reformation called the Tanzimat, where they modernized the Ottoman Empire, made a constitution, gave more freedoms to individuals. At the same time, the Ottomans continued to see a threat from nationalism. You saw forced migration of many peoples, most especially Armenians in Europe, which ultimately, by World War I, leads to the Armenian genocide. And so to see the Ottomans trying to crack down and retaliate against nationalism. You saw a similar process in Russia. At first, under the reign of Alexander II, there was an effort to modernize Russia. Alexander is called the Liberator because he freed the serfs, really ended serfdom, which was this ancient institution in Russia. But he didn't do it that well. And ultimately, Alexander was assassinated by people who didn't think that he was revolutionary enough. And as a result, the Russian Empire had this radical backlash against nationalism. The government instituted a stronger policy of Russification. That is to say, they said everybody needs to adopt Russian culture. In Poland, for example, they took this Catholic church and turned it into an Orthodox Russian cathedral. The people weren't allowed to use their native language. Here's an Armenian, I don't remember what language this one's in. But you can see they're writing in Latin script. Well, they have to use a Cyrillic script because it's Russia. Basically, you saw the Russian Empire tell everybody, you're Russian whether you like it or not. We don't recognize any other nationality groups. Also, as a backlash, you had the outbreak of pogroms. A pogrom is a violent uprising against Jews. Russia had a significant population of Eastern European Jews, and especially after the death of Alexander II, they were blamed for trying to institute revolutionary ideas. And so you saw Russia kind of turn against the idea is nationalism. Now, in pretty much all these cases, the effects to try and mitigate or stop the spread of nationalism really had the opposite effect. When people are told, you don't belong to the ethnic group you say you do, the language you speak isn't as important or valid as the language we're telling you to speak, and you don't have a national identity, there's nothing but resistance to that. And you'll continue to see that resistance kind of come in and out during the late 19th and early 20th century. Ultimately, what nationalism does to these aging empires in Europe is start to put some cracks into the solidification of these empires. To show you the long-term effect, by the time we get to the end of World War I, none of these empires exist anymore. And when we connect that World War I to nationalism, you should be able to see that as people under imperial rule start to develop their national identity, they don't really like being part of what they see as foreign ruled empires.